Hello, everyone. I'm Susanna DeBaca, President and CEO of Business Publications Corporation, which is the parent company of DSM Magazine. And I'm very pleased to welcome you today to our first Lifting the Veil event of 2023. As many of you know, DSM has long been committed to shining a light on mental health through our Lifting the Veil publication and through events. 5 years ago, we decided to add these events, which went virtual during the pandemic. This approach to have the publication and the events together has been so well received that now, through 2 virtual events and an annual publication, we'll continue to explore how the lives of Iowans have been indelibly changed by what continues to be described as America's mental health crisis. This mental health crisis is real right here in Iowa and seems to touch us all in some way. You may have a family member, a colleague, or you yourself struggle with some mental health challenge. This could be at home or at work or at both now because our worlds are so intertwined. As a result, we decided to focus this year's series on aspects of mental health in the workplace. We encourage you to ask questions in the chat today, and I'd love to invite you to start by chatting a question that you have for us here today, or to tell us why you chose to attend this specific event. So I'll keep going while you populate the chat, but please tell us kind of why you're here today, and we'll return to that. Our Lifting the Veil series could not be possible without the support of our presenting sponsor, Clive Behavioral Health. Addressing the growing need for accessible, high-quality behavioral health has been one of Clive Behavioral Health's main goals. They offer a broad range of treatments for both adults and adolescents. And their 100-bed facility is just one way that they're continuing to provide family-centered care so all their patients can achieve a brighter future. They've been with us since the beginning of our virtual series, and joining us here today from Clive Behavioral Health is Jason Bridey, who is the Director of Business Development. Jason, good to see you.
Well, thank you, Susanna. I appreciate the opportunity. And as was mentioned, yes, we have been a proud presenting sponsor since the inception of Lifting the Veil. And we are certainly excited to be a part of this event as well. We think it's very important, certainly, to be involved and help in any way to educate the greater community about the needs that are out there, the different topics that we see and we all deal with in one way or the other, but also to be able to describe and to share opportunities for people that may be listening, giving them some pathways and some avenues of where they could seek help. And we certainly want to put ourselves out there as one of those organizations, one of the newer organizations in the area. We certainly saw the need for mental health inpatient beds and mental health care, not only in central Iowa, but the rest of the state. And as was mentioned, we are a 100-bed inpatient facility. We also provide outpatient services. And without getting too detailed, I certainly want to just mention that we take referrals from professionals, but we also take a lot of walk-ins. So certainly we make ourselves available to provide level of care assessments to anyone who feels that they are in a mental health crisis or in need of mental health services. Just as a brief description, we do offer 3 outpatient services. One is an intensive outpatient program for adolescents age 13 to 17. That's a very popular program. It's about a 4 to 6 week program. We also have a first step recovery program for adults, which is a 4 to 6 week outpatient program for the treatment of chemical dependency, emotional issues, recurring disorders. And then we have just opened an outpatient day program for adults, which is otherwise known as a partial hospitalization program, or PHP. And that's appropriate for patients who have mild to moderate mental, emotional, or substance use disorders who require coordinated, intensive, comprehensive, multidisciplinary treatment. So these are all programs that are actually, whether they walk in and someone comes from the street or they are a step down option for someone who's coming out of an inpatient program. We are trying to continue to grow, and we think we've been doing a good job of that. But we want to, again, just use this opportunity to thank everyone for coming to this event. Know that there are not only Clive Behavioral Health, but others out there to help. If anybody does ever need to get a hold of us, our phone number is 844-680-0504 or clivebehavioralhealth.com. We'll get you to us. So with that, again, thank you for the opportunity to share, and I'll turn it back over.
Thank you so much, Jason and Clive Behavioral Health, for our continued support, your continued support of our Lifting the Veil initiative, and for everything you do to support mental health in our community. A big thank you to all of our supporting sponsors: Delta Dental of Iowa, Employee and Family Resources, Easter Seals, and Optime, and our sustaining sponsor, IMT Insurance. You make these programs possible. So let me tell you a little bit more about what we're going to be doing today, really looking at understanding mental health in the new normal, with quotes, workplace. We're going to be exploring what this new normal truly is, but there's no question that mental health is front and center for employers and employees. According to a recent Forbes article, rates of burnout, anxiety, and depression are at record levels, and that affects everybody, employers and employees alike. Many companies are rethinking how to create a supportive work environment. The article has a quote that really rang true to me. Employees want to work in a place that cares about both their productivity and their emotional well-being. That sounds simple enough, but it's actually very different than how the historical workplace has been set up and operated. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm very excited to be able to introduce you to the DSM team who are behind the scenes. They work tirelessly to create and execute this series along with their other BPC colleagues who have a hand in the publication and events. And I'm thrilled to introduce our new DSM editor, Michael Moraine, who will be moderating today's conversation. Michael joined our BPC team earlier this year, and he's off to a wonderful start. So Michael, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Susanna. And thank you all for tuning in. As Susanna mentioned, this is an important topic, and I am proud to jump into the conversation and the ongoing series that Business Publications Corporation has led. So it's been interesting to see how attitudes have changed about mental health just in the last few years, in part because of discussions like this and because of the hard work of the panelists we're going to hear from in a minute. And especially at the workplace, I think things have obviously changed over the last few years since the pandemic. We have pivoted and pivoted and pivoted until we are dizzy. And as we tackle our to-do list from day to day, it's easy to forget how much has changed. So we wanted to take a moment to just take a look at the landscape and see what mental health in the workplace looks like today and what are the challenges and opportunities surrounding this topic. So we have assembled a really great team of panelists to help us just take the pulse of mental health in the workplace in 2023. So here are our distinguished panelists. There are 5, starting with Timothy Flynn, who is a senior therapist with the Employee Assistance Program with UnityPoint Health. Next, we have Tina Leaf, the Clinical Director at Employee and Family Resources. Next, we have Beth Livingston, who is an Associate Professor of Industrial Relations at the University of Iowa's Tippie College of Business. And she is one of the few people I know whose consultant portfolio includes both John Deere and Yves Saint Laurent. So she has a wide experience talking with businesses and coaching them through some of the intricacies of behavioral psychology. Next, we have Melissa Ness, who is President and CEO at Connectify, which provides HR services for a range of businesses and organizations of all sizes. And finally, we have Scott Young, who directs psychological services for Mind and Spirit for the Mind and Spirit Counseling Center, which until recently was called the Des Moines Pastoral Counseling Center. So you may know it by that name. So as we were preparing this session, we figured that by now, 3 years after the pandemic started, surely there is some research out there or some data to help us just wrap our arms around how people are feeling about the workplace and how those attitudes have shifted. And we figured there was research out there, and lo and behold, up comes a study from the University of Iowa from Beth and her team there. So I'd like to frame the discussion with her. There's a train coming through. So I'm gonna cut to Beth.
Yeah.
Take us through the takeaways of that recent study. I'm gonna go on mute.
No, that's great. Yeah, thank you, Michael. And I'm really excited to be here. You know, one of the through lines of a lot of the research that I've been interested in doing lately, and even before that, has been about relationships and how we connect with other people. And those are, I think we've seen more discussion about those connections than ever before in the last 3 years since the pandemic, of people saying, wait, maybe the way in which people connect with other people truly is something that we should care about. And as a business professor, it has been really heartening to see companies say, wait, you know, perhaps this is something that we should invest in, that we should care about, that we should think about and talk to our employees about. And we did a webinar recently about the role about loneliness at work, and you know, research that emerged during that and research that we've done on our own, finding that, you know, over half of employees want to connect more with their coworkers, but fewer than 10% of employees say they even have one friend at work, and more than half say they have fewer than 5. And so there's this paradox between what people say they want and what they're able to really accomplish in their workplace. You know, our research has also found that the ways in which people build connections at work, if we think about it, you know, there's these paradoxes between how we share emotions with each other, right? You know, what does it actually mean to be a friend, and the way that we connect, and that those things don't always affect everybody equally. They vary in terms of our ability to connect, by age, by race, by gender, all of these ways in which we try to foster connections. And there's been a lot of research that's come out since the pandemic. Loneliness has been a big issue, and we can revisit that later on if we would like. But I do think more and more, when I see what's out there, people want to know how to build connections in an environment that they may not have grown up building, sort of digital social connections, and the way that social media plays a role in our lives. And it has been very heartening to see businesses say, well, what can we do about that?
Beth, what surprised you the most in this recent round of research? I think those loneliness figures were eye-opening for me. What stuck out for you?
You know, I think what stuck out most to me was how few people were able to say they had a friend at work. We throw the word friend around a lot. I mean, how many times you're like, oh, my friend, my friend, my friend, my friend. And if you have to dig down, well, how much are they friends, right? And so even with our very flimsy definition of what a friend is, the fact that so few people at work were able to say they had a friend at work, and we spend so much time at work and with our coworkers, that really stood out to me and demonstrated why this is a business issue, and one that companies should care about. The connections we have with other people, we spend so much time at work. If there's no one in those 8 plus 10 hours that we're spending with our coworkers that we can really feel like we can connect with, there's a big gaping hole, I think, in our social connection.
Thank you for just providing a foundation to get this discussion started. I think that's so useful. So I want to hear, we'll just sort of round robin from our panelists, and we'll give you each a shot at this first question. We'll start with you, Tim, and then Tina, you're up next. But Tim, tell us, 3 years after the pandemic started, what do you think has changed the most about how people feel about their workplace, however they define it? Take a shot at it.
Well, so it's kind of a difficult question for me to answer because I have different areas. One thing I know is for a lot of people, their anxiety increased being away from work, and it increased, you know, I don't even know how to say 10-fold, 20-fold, maybe, I don't know. And I would say the people that I was seeing during that time and even since were people that had never had a mental health problem before. And so that was something that was huge. What I will say also is uniquely, a large part of the people that I serve are employees of UnityPoint. And so I'm seeing a lot of healthcare workers. So they're not having as much of that issue, but their issue has been the stress of the workplace and the stress through the pandemic. But I would suggest, and maybe some of you have seen this as well, that for healthcare workers, that hasn't changed all that much. There's an intensity. We've referred to it in a few workshops we've done as kind of a pandemic hangover, in the sense of, oh yeah, we got through this, but the stress is still there. Plus the difficulties with staffing that I believe, is nationwide, if not worldwide. But that keeps the stress level at a high level. And I think there's a lot of hope something's going to change. So I think stress levels in some ways have increased for healthcare workers, and that's been really hard. But along the lines of talking about the friendship and connection, I think for those workers, they do best when there is a team that functions well together. Yes, we're stressed. Yes, we're understaffed, but we've got each other's backs. And at times when there is a unit that doesn't have that, it gets pretty rough. So, part of my job is individual counseling, but sometimes I will go and work with a group of, if there have been a lot of bad outcomes on a unit, or maybe there's some difficulty with teamwork. So that is something that we try to work on that way. And so I think, to what Beth was saying, is that companies have had to be more responsive to it. And we have been doing that, and our EAP has become more active because of that stress level.
That's a great point. And it occurs to me, with a pandemic hangover, there was no fun that preceded it. I mean, that's the worst kind of hangover. But I think your point's a good one, especially for the kinds of work that require teamwork. You want that cohesive team. You want people to form relationships. And I'm sure that is especially important with UnityPoint. I just got one note from our team behind the scenes. The chat is working. So if you have questions, go ahead and type them into the chat. I know this can be a multitasking challenge, but we have a team ready to assist and who are monitoring the chat. So if questions occur to you, go ahead and type those in. Tina, let's hear from you next. And then Melissa, you're on deck.
Thanks, Michael. I'm excited to be here, and I think that this topic is a great topic to be a part of and engage in the conversation. When I think about how people feel about their workplace, I feel like I experience it on a continuum, right? I think at the beginning of the pandemic, people were like, okay, we can be home, and and it was always a discussion of when we get back to normal. And then discussions had to change, like, this is the new normal, right? And how do you experience that? And then as, the pandemic shifted, and people are getting back into the office a little bit more and the workplace, you think about all the things that they missed in that time, the socialization that happens, down the hall. And so for us, I think it's a mixed bag of, they like the autonomy of being able to work from home when they can. The flexibility that creates for them, I think is super important. I think another thing to note, it was interesting when you would ask people about their workplace at the start of the pandemic. Sometimes my workplace was, in a spare bedroom, and you never got to disconnect from it, because it was always right there. And so I think also getting back into the office and being able to, have that commute to work. Like Tim, I see, we provide services to EAP clients, lots of different places, lots of different people. And some of their biggest concerns coming in and seeking services was, how do I adjust from work to home when it all takes place in the same room? And they really struggled with that. And so we saw a huge increase of people using services because of the shift in how we defined what our workplace was.
You're right. It's such a blurry situation now. And some people are great at compartmentalizing and some people aren't. Samantha in the chat raises a really good point about just that her work friends, she has friendships at work, but those friendships are very different than her out of work friends. And so there's this, I mean, we are encouraged to bring our whole selves to work, but sometimes it's useful to have those compartments. And when you're working from a guest bedroom or at your kitchen table, it's that throws people's routines into disarray. So we're getting used to it, but I think it's noteworthy that even this format where we're seeing talking heads on a screen would have seemed very different to us 4 or 5 years ago. So we are all adjusting. Melissa, let's hear from you. What's your take on this question? How are attitudes shifting here?
Yeah, well, thank you. And thanks for letting me be a part of the conversation. Mental well-being is so near and dear to my heart. I can't applaud BPC enough for tackling this topic on behalf of all of us and for all the participants who have joined and care about the conversation. I think that's such a great place to start. I think we're all humans and we crave connection and purpose. And so, in terms of how people feel coming back to the workplace, I think after something as impactful as a global pandemic, we all recognize the importance of our well-being and of our life choices. And we spend so much time at work. So, what does that mean? It means that people are really feeling like they want more flexibility. They need to feel more purpose. They want to feel connection. How does their workplace align with them personally? And so that's what I'm seeing that people are feeling about their workplace, feeling about coming back to work is, after that big period of time that just rocked all of our worlds, they're looking for something a little different and they need something a little different.
Absolutely. Scott, you're up. What's your take on it?
Thanks, Michael. I'm glad to be here. Yeah, I think there's been a lot of really good points raised. And, in my experience with my clinical practice, it really seems like there's a real tension in how people are thinking about their workplace now. I'll take, for example, I'm actually working from home today, and I've got a little bit of a cold. So if you see me drinking my hot coffee so I can keep talking, that's a wonderful benefit, right? I can see my clients and patients and not make anybody sick. But yet it's also, I am literally in a bedroom, as some people have mentioned. So it's kind of one of those things where there's just this really strange tension of there's some really good aspects, there's some really challenging things. And I think it seems like also that it's important to kind of consider the whole person's situation. I've seen a lot of my folks who have struggled the most with working from home are the ones who seem to have the fewest adult interactions outside of work, typically. Caregivers, especially, I've seen a lot of those folks who their main interaction source other than work is with children, and it seems like they get pretty lonely for some adult interaction from time to time. So there's some interesting things for sure going on.
Thank you. There's so much overlap, and I'm curious about all of this stuff. And I had some coffee, so get ready for a barrage of questions. But I think Carol raised a really good question in the chat, and I want to circle back to you, Melissa. She talked a little bit about that duality that we're in right now, where many workers love the independence and the flexibility to work from home, but we also want those water cooler connections, and most employers at this point recognize the value of some of those unofficial, non-official, just interactions in passing in the break room. And Carol wonders whose job is it? Who is responsible for workers' mental health? Obviously, it's a combination, but is it ultimately on the employee? Or does the employer have some responsibility to build a healthy culture? How would you answer that question?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. Employers have some responsibility to build a healthy culture, to create the kind of environment where people can thrive. I mean, at least in my opinion, good employers. And so really spending time on how can they do that? How can they model the way? How can they provide work-life balance where possible. How can they provide EAP services? Even train managers on how to ask those compassionate questions. How are you doing today? Or how is your family? And being there and showing true care for their employees. So I do think employers need to do that. And of course, employees, we all need to take responsibility for our mental health and well-being. What do we need? Who do we need to ask for help when we need it? And of course, employers providing that safe place to do that and have those conversations and direct employees to the EAP or things like that. But if we can't talk about it or we suffer in silence as an employee or a person, then we have some responsibility there as humans to speak up and ask for what we need.
I'll just toss this out to the group. Melissa, you can take it, or Beth, based on your business clients or anybody. What are some of the specific ways that employers are accommodating these evolving needs and wishes from their employees? Are there specific strategies that you have seen so far that you recommend so far, besides just figuring out sort of an in the office at home schedule? Are there other things that employers are providing to kind of help us through this limbo time?
I will jump in just and say, I have seen, I am starting to see more creativity and innovation on this, which I think is nice. I think I have early on, about a year and a half ago, I saw a lot of companies coming to me like, what's the best practice here? And I'm like, well, there isn't a best, we're in a whole new era. There is no best practice I can share with you. But you should be creative to find out what your employees need. And I think one thing I'm seeing a lot more intentionality. I wrote this in the chat, but a lot of, in an era of remote work, hybrid work, of not knowing when people are going to be co-located, I've seen some companies I've worked with be a lot more intentional about creating opportunities for connection, where you could just be like, well, we're in the same place and whoever's around, we'll go to lunch and we'll just see who organically builds connections with each other. There is now more intentionality. We are doing more, social moments, more, getting together where we can just talk about something silly in a room. We're setting up opportunities to connect in different ways and finding ways to bring people into that intentionally who may have been left out in an organic situation. The people who aren't extroverted or already feel excluded can sometimes just, that exacerbates it. How do I jump into that water cooler conversation if I don't know how to do that? When you have managers and companies who are more intentional, they set up particular Zoom calls. For instance, they set up, fun and games and scavenger hunts and fun things to do to bring people together intentionally. Those are much better at creating these, what I like to call these micro moments of connection. You don't have to be besties with everybody to have that. We all know those moments of just warmth and joy just from having some random connection with someone. Well, you can foster those situations and have those moments of connection. And so I think it's the intentionality I'm seeing some people be better at than others.
I think that's definitely true, that on the part of employers, it takes a little bit more intention, where some things just came naturally because you were just ricocheting around the office. Now you have to put it on a list or think about it more, just to reach out or to give somebody a virtual high five in a way that just came naturally when everybody was under the same roof. Are others, anybody else want to take a stab at that one?
I'll just add really quick. I love what Beth said. I agree with it completely. Intentional connections. One other thing that can never be underestimated is just asking one-on-one your employees for feedback. What would help them feel connected? What do they need? What are they looking for? I think you show that care, first of all, and second of all, you understand what's important to them versus trying to guess or prescribe something that may or may not be a fit.
Aaron, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
So the one thing I want to say is a lot of these avenues of getting people to connect more sometimes can be met at first with resistance, and you'll see people not get into it. Like, for instance, I mean, I'm sure anyone who's ever been in a meeting and they do an icebreaker, and there's a kind of a eye rolling that happens and a groan, but then it works, and people might not admit it, but it does. And so those are the types of things that I think are incredible. They can be great. An example for us here is, I thought this was at first when I saw it, admittedly, I'm embarrassed. I thought it was cheesy. There was this wellness email that went out. But every time that email goes out, we get people calling in for appointments with EAP. So these things work even though people resist that kind of connection. But I really appreciate the people saying it's not about people, we got to all be friends. It's having positive connections that get us out of our heads and get us into human contact, even if it's just acquaintance level.
I would add too that I feel like, you know, as a leader or a manager, you know, I take pride in creating a culture in which, you know, we can talk to one another and you can ask for help, and we normalize that, hey, we're all struggling, you know, on any given day, and it does create that connectedness for folks.
There certainly has, I think people are certainly freer to talk about it, or there are, you know, in the break room, there are flyers that go up, and it's just become part of our language a little bit more. In the chat, somebody raised a good question. Aaron had a great question about how employers build psychological safety over time. How do you create a space where people feel okay to tell, you know, some trusted coworkers that they are struggling? And I want to connect it to another question here about how to find the right balance where you want to support somebody who is struggling, but not overburden or overshare with other coworkers who still got to get the work done. For the panel here, what would you recommend for the two sides of that? You want to support the individual who might be struggling and create a safe space, but in a way that doesn't load down the other employees who are, you know, trying to get the products made or the services done or check things off the list. What would you recommend? I know that's a toughie.
One of the things I was thinking about, Michael, pertaining to that second part of the question anyway, is just maybe really trying to think thoughtfully about the rhythm that the employee might have. You know, it's been my experience that, you know, folks with depression, anxiety, whatever it might be, they have good days and they have bad days. They have certain times of the day that are better than others for them, and trying to work with them to figure out how can they do the work in a way that works with their rhythm of how they're feeling, so that they're still able to contribute and be part of the team, and they're not, you know, feeling that sense of being burdened to their coworkers and colleagues, but it also is, you know, helping them to be able to take some time for self-care when they need it.
It's also important to, you know, notice when a colleague is struggling, right? I mean, to say you matter as a person here at work, I think, you know, also opens the door to work-life balance and balancing, you know, self-care. You know, I think as much as we can promote that in the workplace, I try to do it by leading by example, right? You know, I don't try to work a ton of hours, you know, a ton of hours over 40, because I want my people to have that balance. And so I think we also have to model that, you know, this whole idea of it's okay to not be okay sometimes, and to take a break and to notice that for yourself.
Absolutely. I agree with you, Tina. I think that it's really helpful when there are those role models of somebody who can step forward and say, hey, you know, I've had some struggles too. And especially if it's somebody in leadership, I think that makes it a lot easier for those other folks to be able to come forward and say, hey, I need some help too. So that kind of self-disclosure and willingness to be vulnerable can be so helpful.
I love that you brought up that willingness to be vulnerable, because I do, as a professor who studies this sort of stuff, I get asked a lot, not only the stuff I research, but that's like, how do you change culture? We need to change our culture. We need to change it, like that. It's like if I could answer that question, right, I'd be so rich. But I think, you know, it does come down to something I always remind companies, which is people create and maintain cultures, particularly the people who have power in your organizations. Those are hard things to recognize and realize sometimes, that the people who are at the top levels of leadership play a role here, right? But even the people, and particularly, you know, especially the people who are at the first line level of leadership, we need to be providing them with the resources and training to be able to make sure that they do feel safe being vulnerable. We have layers of leadership and management in most organizations. And for many of us, our initial immediate supervisor may not know what they're doing either, right? And so they may have been elevated and trained during the pandemic and, are trying to figure this all out as well. And so I think that it is important we recognize that. But one thing I always say about psychological safety is it's like a universal design question in that it harms no one. There is no downside. Right? There are very few things in business where there's no downside to doing and creating a place where people feel safe disagreeing. People feel safe being vulnerable. People feel safe to make mistakes. There's no downside to that. And there's no research to suggest it, right? And I think that is something that it's easier, it's hard to start, to change businesses, but it is absolutely worthwhile in almost every situation to look at it and to think about doing that, because we're talking about it here in the context of mental health, which is obviously has life, effective sort of impacts. But even then I'd like to try something new. I want to be innovative and creative, or, I'm the only woman in this group. There's all of these situations where having a psychologically safe culture is useful. And so if you're thinking of what's the most bang for your buck in terms of organizational change and culture change, I will always direct people in that direction.
That's a great point. I'm reading a book right now that Jim Autry wrote back in the 90s. And he led the Meredith Corporation for a long time. It's called Love and Profit, The Art of Caring Leadership. And he talks it, and he could have written it yesterday and the lessons still apply, but he talks about the idea of special treatment, where you don't want to tailor something and give one employee an advantage over another, or, but he's like, everybody gets special treatment. I mean, we work with individuals who all have their own lives and they're complicated. So everybody gets special treatment. You have to adapt to work with individuals. So one solution might work great for somebody and be completely the wrong answer for somebody else. So I think more and more leaders and companies have to recognize that they can write policies, but there are ways to, adapt them so that everybody can thrive in a situation that is constantly evolving. So your points are good ones about accessibility and sort of just making a workplace that works for everybody. I want to switch gears just one bit in one of our preparatory calls. I think it was Tina who mentioned, as people are returning to work and more offices are kind of bringing people back, the routines that we established when we were fully remote are changing. And I think it was Tina who brought up a great point about pets, where people developed really closer than usual relationships with their pets. And when they're called back to the office, they worried, well, what's going to happen, to my other household creatures who have a new routine? I mean, kids are one thing, but what are some other things that are stressors for people as they return to work? What are some of the things that people are thinking about?
I feel like for some, I think for some at the very beginning of, transitioning back to work, it was like, I don't know that I necessarily want to be in such close proximity to so many people, and I think for some it was, commute, and, I've redone my budget and it doesn't include gas to get to work and the time it takes to get ready, and leave the house and go to the office. I think we're, they seem small and silly, but I mean, we got used to a way of living for, 2 years and working from home. And
yeah, that's a great point.
And during that working from home, we were reminded that we were doing really well, right? We were praised for that, right? Like, it wasn't like, oh man, we were told, and So that is always comes in. It's like, but for the past 2, were you lying? You said that I was doing so well. And so I do think that also is important. It's not just we changed, but we changed and we felt like we were doing all right. And so it can be dicey. Sorry, Tim, I saw you unmuted.
No, I had a client a while back who was being told, oh, you're doing great. And then all of a sudden they got a message that was quite the opposite. And it was like, wait, oh, we're validating because of the pandemic. I don't know. But no, one thing I would say is a huge part of this is insight, self-insight, because people having these things that are more convenient, staying at home. But I've had a few clients who are like, you know what, I know I need to get back at least 1 or 2 days a week, and it's going to help me, but it's not necessarily comfortable. And so I've got to get back to that. But there's a lot of people, as I said, have developed a kind of anxiety, become almost phobic of having people close physically, or those kind of physical, and it's ironic because it's that physical contact, that not contact, but physical touch that we're saying is essential. People are like, oh, I don't want that. I want my space.
We are complicated. We are complicated creatures. Bethany raised a great question about peer support and how that is emerging as a tool. What are the benefits of this model of peer support in the workplace? And have any of you seen it to be effective? Maybe it's early on this one, but go ahead, Tim.
Well, so and this is very specific to the healthcare profession, in the sense of we developed a program here at UnityPoint called Embracing You, and it's training peer supporters, and the idea of being with, it's for everything, and it goes to what you're talking about. But initially it was a lot about secondary trauma and people dealing with that kind of stuff in the hospitals, and needing to have somebody to have that early touch with them, in the sense of, people who have signs of PTSD, they do much better when there's some kind of connection very early on, and their prognosis for getting help and moving on through that. And the peer supporter encouraging them to get to the next level, encouraging them for us to come to EAP. So I think it's a huge way, and it's an early intervention. And it's a way too of somebody is identified as a peer supporter, they're putting on another hat. Like I'm talking to you right now, but I'm not a supervisor, or I'm not your coworker who's going to report you. We're talking about something that is mental health related, mental health wellness.
Along those lines of sort of enlisting other people to help out, Lucindy raises a good question that a big stress on current employees is almost a surge of what she calls separation anxiety among small children, where mom and dad are going back to work. And it sounds like most parents are not receptive to taking the child to a therapist or a school psychologist. Are there things short of that you can recommend? What else can you recommend besides taking kids to a professional therapist? Are there sort of baby steps in the right direction?
Go ahead, Tina.
I think for me, it's validating where the kiddo is at. I think as a parent, we want to be like, no, come on, you got to get out the door. I'm going to go this way. You're going to go this way, because society says we have to do this thing, right? But I think it's also slowing down and saying, I get it. You're having really big feelings about that, and that feels scary. And I'm going to be here, and, doing some of those reassuring things, and from a therapeutic stance, when I treat that, sometimes it's having those, connection pieces between a kiddo and a parent. Like, you're going to go to school and mommy's going to go to work, but you have this little stuffy that reminds me, and so those are practical things that parents can do.
And in addition to that, I think it's really good to have goodbye rituals. That can really help as well to get the kiddo comfortable and expecting what's going to happen.
I also to think, support. So thank you for sharing this stuff with the kids. I have no experience other than my own kids. I have no experience working with other people's kids. So this is really, really good to hear. I do think, though, when I talk to parents I started studying work family issues and remote work stuff well before COVID. And I do think it's really important that we have been talking a lot about how things have shifted during COVID. And it's important that we do that. But a lot of these issues have been going on. There's been loneliness. People have been, I mean, if you look pre-COVID, all of the anxiety about the digital transformation, online dating, all of that was pre-COVID, right? And the same, my mom stayed home with all of us. There have, I think, always been these fears that parents have the moment that they put their kids in preschool for the first time or whatever, or decide to go back to work. And some of that is real. The children are feeling that, and some of it is we are feeling that. A friend of mine is a psychologist, and remember we were kind of joking recently as our children are in theater together, and it's like, oh well, I'm always worried, am I screwing my kids up? She's like, we're all screwing our kids up in different ways, right? Like we all are. And so the question just is how, let that go of what they're going to tell their therapist in 15 years. Let that go and focus on what you can do from the moment. And sometimes I do think it's talking to the parents and saying, you are anxious, and that's fine, because there's nothing that's not anxiety ridden about raising children. And so I do think that perhaps if it's not focused on bringing your kids to a therapist, having group talks where you can talk to other parents who are like, yeah, I've been there, totally. My kids sucked at that and now they're better. Like being able to understand that too can be incredibly helpful, and moments to build connection. Even if we're not going to go hang out and have drinks at some point, I can still see your humanity in a different way too.
It's useful to remember that there are 7 billion people in the world, and like
somebody did it right, figured it out, right?
Other people have made those mistakes, so
yes.
it's gonna be.
Surely I'm not the first who screwed my children up in this one particular way. Surely, yeah.
We're gonna wrap up in a minute. This hour is flying by, but I've asked all of the panelists to sort of either prepare some closing thoughts ahead of time, or if something has clicked and you want to leave us with some parting thoughts in a moment just from what we have discussed, go for it. But before we get there, I would like to thank our sponsors again. We couldn't do this without the support of all of the folks you see on the screen, especially Jason Bridey with our presenting sponsor, Clive Behavioral Health. Thank you so much for your support and the work you do year-round to help the whole community. Also, mark your calendars for a few upcoming events. On August 29th is our next unveiling party for the next issue of DSM. We just had a great unveiling release party in Ankeny on Tuesday, so there's a fresh copy out and about, but our next one is at the end of August. Then on September 14th, we will have the ceremony for our annual LGBTQ Legacy Leader Awards. Mark your calendar for that. And then on November 8th, we will reassemble for another Lifting the Veil session with a new slate of experts. And today we've just wanted to take the pulse and get a snapshot of where mental health is in the workplace in 2023. But in November, we're going to really come up with some additional practical strategies, some solutions that we can offer to help employers and employees really navigate this evolving issue. So tune in again on November 18th or November 8th. Also, I encourage you to subscribe to all the BPC products, collect all the series. In addition to the Business Record, you can subscribe to DSM Magazine in print and digital. If you just go to dsmmagazine.com, you'll find all of the goods right there. If you have story ideas, either prompted from this discussion or just on your own, fling them my way. My email address is right there. Also, if you would like to advertise, we would love to hear from you. You can contact my colleague, Emily Schultz, right there. Emily Schultz, her email address is right there. Yeah, and then moving on, you can get a copy of our latest print edition of Lifting the Veil, which rounds up articles that look at mental health from a variety of different perspectives. There is a current one on shelves now, and we are already working on the next annual issue. Also, of course, there are tons of resources that you may find helpful, or you can pass along to friends and family and coworkers who might need some support. There is so much information out there. We have put together a list of some of the local resources that we would recommend, but definitely reach out if you have questions. There is a wealth of information, and all of this, I think, we benefit from collective wisdom So let's hear from the panelists, and I think we'll go in reverse order of how we started. So let's hear first from Scott, if you would like to offer some wisdom as we wrap up.
Well, I don't know about wisdom, but I'll give something a shot.
We'll take it.
I saw somebody raised a question about introverts and how that can be challenging in terms of building that community. And I really think that's a really good point to think about, because there's sort of this common misconception in a way that introverts, they don't like being around people, they want to be by themselves. And that's really not entirely true. It's just they want a different kind of interaction, right? They don't like the big group active involvement, right? They want to have more in-depth, deep connected interactions. And so thinking a little bit about how do you, create dyadic relationships for those folks, right? Where they can have a person they get close to and communicate with. So I just think it's really so valuable to be focusing on the different needs for connection so that we can really all work together on the profound levels of loneliness that Beth has been able to talk a little bit about today. So thank you all.
Thank you. Let's go with Melissa.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of parting thoughts for me is first, the folks who are here, the awareness, you've shown the awareness, you want to learn about it and you care, and that's absolutely critical and the foundational step. And so I applaud you for that. And, thinking about how do you equip yourself and all of your leaders on what are the ways to help employees is critically important. And then training, thinking about how you train them even further on those conversations, on those resources. And I think that will go a long way towards that psychological safety, a better workplace and culture.
Thank you very much. Tina, let's hear from you.
I would say that my parting thoughts are embracing the idea that a work from home or a hybrid model is kind of the new norm. And I think we as employers and employees found most of us found a really good rhythm in being able to do that. And also finding ways to stay connected to colleagues and others. I think the last thing is part of our EAP program. We have an app that we use called Together All, and it's a super cool app where anyone who has our EAP, they have access to this app, and you can just connect anonymously with other folks who may have similar struggles, similar strengths, but just a different platform to connect.
That's a great point. Tim, you're up.
So coming out of this period where we're still very much in it, I think, not the pandemic itself, but we've had the pandemic, we've had a period of incredible political, social unrest, global unrest, and it's caused huge amounts of stress. And so here we are talking about this. And I think that's the good thing. We're building our awareness and we're saying something needs to change. And that's an excellent thing. What I get concerned about, I think, is we've been in a trend in many fields. There's only a few maybe that aren't touched, that employers are trying to get more out of employees for the same amount. And so they say work-life balance on one hand, but then do more. And it's really a hard balance, and it's a tug of war. And I think we're burning people out when we do that. So I hope that more companies, more employers can hear this, that the better you treat your people. And I think there are some countries that get this better than we do, to be quite honest. But the better we treat them, the more aware we are of that, the better we'll get from them and the more loyal people will be to a company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely wisdom to be gained from beyond our borders. I subscribe to the French notion where everybody takes all of August off. Just take it off. All right, Dr. Livingston, you get the final word. Bring us home.
You know, I love hearing from all of you because you give me different perspectives on these things. And it's always nice as a professor too, to hear some of the things that pop up in research being actually, being the stuff that you all are dealing with every day, which I think is always a good, nice check that we're asking the right questions and, trying to solve the right problems. I would say, one of the things that has struck me since the pandemic and is continuing now is the anxieties that managers have, companies have, and employees are having about this. A lot of these issues, when I come in to talk about remote work, for instance, that I hear is anxiety. Well, what if we can't do? I don't know how, right? I don't know how to manage people if I can't see them. What if they're doing this? What if we can't meet the next concern? There's so much of these voices that are like, what if we can't, instead of what if we can? And a lot of what I try to say is, there's so much creativity, innovation that go into so many different business problems, right? If we have a supply chain issue, we got all heads on deck to try to figure out how we solve it. If we want to come up with a new product, we're all talking about it. If there is, if you think about in medicine, right? Like the best minds trying to solve the most complex medical problems that you can come up with and do. And I always say, well, how can we bring that same energy toward how our employees feel, right? How we make you have the capability, the energy, the intelligence, the creativity. You'll take the risks for some things. And what you take risks for tells me a lot about what you value. And so I ask them a lot to look within and what they're risking and what they're doing and when they're willing to put themselves out there and why is it for something versus others, and be honest about what those values. And so having this sort of internal audit on what our actions are reflecting of our values, and to recognize when it's our own anxieties as leaders that's leading us to make policy and HR related questions, right? Is it what's best for them or is it what's easiest for us? And we need to be really honest with ourselves about those things. And I think that speaks to Tim's point, which was we're asking people to do a lot of work right now. And a lot of that's because we're really anxious with the changing economy and we don't know how to manage that. And we're gonna bite ourselves in the rear ends by chasing off the very human capital that we need to be able to address those growing challenges, because we are all human and we only have so much limited energy and attention. And so, I do think recognizing that in ourselves, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, and finding people that help us find those best parts of ourselves, whether they're within our workplaces or not, are things that we can all do, whether you are a leader or not. And I saw a lot of really great questions of people saying, well, I have a hard time, like, why can't they just, right? Or well, I have a lot of hard times with that. And I often say, well, that's a lot of times for us to sit with ourselves. Like I have a discomfort with certain, bring me all the people all the time, right? And I have to recognize that my energy doesn't match some people's energies. And that's not always a them problem, it's a me problem. And as a leader, it's on us to figure out what they need and not how I want to be. And so the more you can continue to work towards those things, I think the better off we'll be as a human race, perhaps, but also just as business people.
Thank you. There are certainly different kinds of what ifs. There are worrisome what ifs, but there are also some what ifs full of possibilities that if we all put our minds together, we can make some real progress. So thank you all. Thank you to the experts. We really appreciate your insights. And thank you all for tuning in. We will keep this conversation going in live events and in print and just in the world. Thank you for your care and support today. And I encourage you to take care, and we will keep in touch. Have a great day.
A waiver, so bye.
Thanks, everybody. You guys are naturals. We should take this show on the road.
I was taking notes over here.